hearties. Let's talk a little bit about the stroke tool. So I'm here in my workspace. I'm going to go to Window. Whoops, I'm going to go into Illustrator. And I'm going to go into Window. That's where we keep the panels. They're all in alphabetical order. We're going to talk about strokes. Now I have my stroke window open. Sometimes when you pull it out from the window, it looks like this. You need to come over here and say Show Options so that you have all of the choices that you can make. So I'm going to go get my pen tool. And here's a hard corner and a soft curve. Hit the escape key. So let's go through this. We can change the weight. We've done that. We can change the color. This represents the color of the stroke. We're going to talk more about color in class on Friday. I can change the cap. Watch the ends of the stroke as I do this. Now that's a rounded cap. All right, this is a square cap. I think you can see that the end of what you can see is actually pushed out past the actual end of the stroke. I prefer sometimes doing a rounded cap. If I'm going to do a rounded cap, I'll also do a rounded corner. And you can, if you're looking for that kind of chunky graphic look, this can be helpful. If we skip down here to dashed line, you wanted to create a dashed line. And if you set the dash to 0 with a rounded cap, and it's a 4-point rule, so I'll give it a gap. The gap is the space between. Depending on how big that is, you can create dotted lines if you need to. This was big when I worked in the textbook industry. All right, if you decide you don't want that, you can just shut it back off again. These are your arrowheads that are going to go on the ends, and so you have quite a bewildering choice of arrowheads. Now, this is a very thick line, which is why I have this humongous arrowhead, but I'll change the scale. If I click on this little link button, I've linked the two parts of the scale together. You'll notice that when I change one, it changes the other. You can see how small that arrowhead is in relationship to the thickness of the rule. And if I change the thickness of the rule, see the arrowhead gets smaller, and I can go back in and change it. So I can also do the other end, and in addition to the arrowheads, you can have the back of the arrow. This is being a little wackadoodle because of this hard turn that the rule is doing, the stroke is doing. But if I do that, see that? And see that extra little space? That's because this is also scaled. So if I scale it up. Now, you see how wackadoodle this is happening? The rule is too thick and these are too big to sit on such a tiny little space. So if I want this to resolve itself, I need to give it a little bit of air. Basically what you can do is you can go in and you can play with these different symbols that it will automatically put on the ends of your lines. And if, for example, you wanted to change direction, you could change direction. All right? These are useful when you're creating a presentation and you want to, just as an example, let's say you had a presentation and you wanted to point something out to the viewer. You can go in and do an arrow. I definitely wouldn't do it that big. And then you could write a little caption here and say, here's this great design over here. So the one thing I really want to show you, though, is, let me get myself another rule, is the profile. If a lot of you are creating rules that sit inside your illustration, and the strokes kind of define parts of, for example, a hand or maybe a tree or a bush. Well, one of the ways that you can really add a little bit of personality to the line is by changing the profile. Let me get a nice thick line, and I can come down here. These are all the profiles. All right, and just by clicking on that, I've created a much more calligraphic line. And so you can go in and kind of play around with these. If you have a shape that you've drawn, you want to play with it, you want it to have a little bit more than just the regular line. You can really go in and have some fun. The next step that we didn't talk about in class today, but we'll probably talk, I may show it to you on Friday, would be the brush tool. The brush tool is the next way to add this kind of pizzazz to the rule. And then let me just show you something else. If I go in and I have this rule, there's a tool here in the toolbox, and you all saw me fumbling around in class. It took me a minute to find it. The name of the tool is the width tool. Here it is. In my toolbox, it's underneath the rotate tool. It may be somewhere else, but this is what it looks like. It looks like a path with a little wide thing. And you can see the demo. You can vary the thickness of a stroke along a path with the width tool. So if you need to have something a little bit more elaborate, you can build it with the width tool. See what I did there? Let me do it again. I really encourage you to play around with the width tool. If you're drawing paths and you've just had enough and you really want to, you really want to just kind of busk it, you can go get the width tool, and you have to highlight it before you work with it. So let me go get the width tool. I'm going to add a point here. Everywhere I click and drag, whether I drag in or I drag out, this is the kissing cousin to the mesh tool. When we start to work with the mesh tool, you're going to see the similarities. But I just want to point something out to you. This looks like a closed shape now. But if I go into keyline mode, if I hit Command Y, you can see it's still a rule. Let me go out of keyline mode and into preview mode. If I want this to be a shape instead of a rule, I have to tell the machine to convert it from a rule, a stroke line, to a shape. And the way that I do that, I go into Object. We're talking about paths, so we're going to go to the Path submenu, and we're going to say Outline the stroke. And the moment that we do that, again, if I go in, you can see now it's a shape. I've changed it from a stroke, from a path, to a shape. And this now it is subject to all of the rules that apply to shapes. I can turn it into a clipping mask. I can draw inside of it using the Draw Inside tool, as we saw in class today. I can add a stroke to the outside, right? So now, if I go back in, okay? Now, the question was asked in class, and it was a very good question. Can you use this object, path, outline, stroke on any path? And the answer is yes. Let's say I create a path and I add a profile to it to create this kind of calligraphic swatch. It's a stroke. There are things I can do with it, and there are things I can't do with it. I can't use it as a clipping mask. I can't use the Draw Inside tool because it's not a path, it's a stroke. But again, if I go Object, Path, Outline, Stroke, you can see it's gone now from being a stroke. The path is gone now, and it is now a closed shape made up of what used to be that stroke line. And I have a little bit more flexibility with it as I work. So that's what we covered in class. I'll show you a few more things on Friday. I'll show you the blob brush tool, which is another way of creating lines that have a little bit more personality. All right?